In the middle of a construction site lost among the mountains, a 21-year-old female mechanic is humiliated in front of everyone when the millionaire points to the huge road roller that even his engineers couldn't start. With a cruel laugh, he taunts her, "If you can get this machine running in 3 minutes, I'll give you my business. But if you fail, forget about working in this country." When the clock starts ticking and she approaches the metal monster without even opening the hood, something happens that makes everyone hold their breath, unable to believe what they are seeing. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching this story from. Amidst that landscape of mountains touching the clouds, between the constant roar of the machines and the pungent smell of diesel mixed with damp earth, Loleta Ruiz worked. This young woman was only 21 years old, but her calloused hands and steely gaze told a very different story from that of any other girl her age. Loleta was a certified heavy machinery operator. And when I say operator, I'm not talking about someone who barely knows how to move levers. No, no, no. This woman knew every nut and bolt, every hydraulic system, every secret of those metal beasts that move entire mountains. Do you know how her father, Don Duarte Bayon, a man who had been building roads throughout Colombia for 32 years, taught her all this? He was the one who taught her from the time she was just 12 years old. While other girls played with dolls, Loleta was under the chassis of an excavator, learning to distinguish the sound of a worn bearing from that of a low-pressure hydraulic pump. Don Duarte always told her, "My daughter, these machines have a soul. If you respect and understand them, they will respond to you." But what no one at the construction site knew, what Loleta kept as a secret treasure in her heart, was that every night, after her exhausting 10-hour days operating machinery under the relentless mountain sun, she would board a rickety bus that took her to the city. There, in a classroom lit by flickering fluorescent lights, she studied industrial mechanical engineering. She paid for each semester with her own salary, penny by penny saved. She had been doing this for 3 years, maintaining a perfect grade point average, while her classmates, children of wealthy families, complained about how difficult it was to study without working. In her mind, Loleta had a crystal clear dream: to prove that women could not only operate machines, but also design, repair, and improve them. She wanted that one day, when people saw a highway, they would know that women's hands had built it with the same strength and knowledge as any man. Now, let me tell you that the project was in crisis. And when I say crisis, I mean a situation that had 800 workers hanging by a thread. The Bomb BB213 road roller, a 13-ton German machine valued at $4.2 million pesos, had been completely dead for 2 weeks, stopped, useless like a giant piece of junk. And do you know what that meant? Without that compactor, the 15 kilometers of new asphalt that had already been laid could not be compacted. Without compaction, the asphalt would degrade in weeks. The multi-million-dollar contract with the government would be lost. 800 families would be left without a livelihood. The pressure was so thick you could cut it with a knife. 3 specialized technicians had arrived from Bogota, engineers with fancy degrees and toolboxes that cost more than Loleta's annual salary. They had spent 14 days disassembling, checking, measuring. They changed fuel filters, checked the entire electrical system, and inspected every sensor on the 129 horsepower Deutz engine. Nothing. The steel beast simply refused to wake up. And it was exactly at that moment of desperation that he arrived. Silverio Amaya stepped out of a Mercedes-Benz G-Class SUV as black as midnight, so pristine that it seemed to glow with its own light. The man was 48 years old, but he looked younger with the kind of youth that only money can buy. He wore a $12,000 Italian suit that seemed to be painted on his body, crocodile leather shoes, and a Patek Philippe watch on his wrist that cost more than all the machinery Loleta had ever operated in her life. Silverio Amaya was the owner of the Amaya infrastructure empire, valued at $380 million. But here's what you need to know. This man had never once dirtied his hands with actual concrete. He inherited everything from his father 8 years ago. He signed contracts from an office on the 40th floor of a building in Bogota with a panoramic view of the city, while other men and women put in the sweat and blood. When Silverio walked toward where the stopped concrete pump was, his $3,000 shoes sank just a centimeter into the mud, and his face twisted into a grimace of disgust. The workers instinctively moved away. This man radiated power, but also something else. A deep emptiness in his eyes that no amount of money seemed to be able to fill. What no one knew was that Silverio carried a secret pain. 8 months earlier, his only son, 19-year-old Matthias, had abandoned him. Their last conversation had been brutal. "Dad, you're an empty man. You buy everything, but you build nothing. You don't know what it means to create something with your own hands. I don't recognize you as my father." Those words had pierced his chest like bullets, but Silverio had reacted as he always did, with arrogance, with money, trying to buy back his love. It didn't work. Matthias left for Europe and didn't answer his calls. Now Silverio was there to fire the chief engineer for incompetence. That was what he did, solving problems by firing people, never getting his hands dirty. Loletta was near the boom, checking the technical manual she had photocopied at the university for the umpteenth time, looking for any clues the technicians might have overlooked. Her blue overalls were stained with grease, her hair tied back in a practical ponytail, her safety boots worn but functional. That's when Silverio's eyes fell on her. His expression immediately changed to one of confusion mixed with disdain. "What is this girl doing here?" he asked the foreman in an annoyed tone. "Is she someone's secretary, or did she come to clean the offices?" The silence that followed was so heavy that even the machines seemed to fall silent. Don Duarte, who was a few meters away supervising another section, felt his blood run cold. He knew that look. He had seen it hundreds of times directed at his daughter. The foreman, a 55-year-old man named Rodrigo, swallowed hard before replying, "Don Silverio, this is Loletta Ruiz, our certified operator of the BOMAG and the Caterpillar 336 excavator, one of the best we have." Silverio's laughter was cruel, sharp as broken glass. An operator, a woman operating machinery of this caliber, he shook his head in theatrical disbelief. "I can see why this project is in crisis. They're playing at being progressive while the real work is falling apart." Loletta clutched the technical manual in her hands, feeling rage boiling in her stomach, but she kept her composure. Her father had taught her something fundamental. Dignity is not fought for by shouting, it is demonstrated by working. Now, my dear friends, this is when things get ugly, because quiet contempt is one thing, but public humiliation is quite another. And let me tell you, what happened next made me clench my fists in sheer indignation when I found out. Silverio approached the W213 as if the machine itself were a personal offense. His eyes scanned the 13 tons of German steel, the 2.13-meter-wide compactor cylinder covered with a thin layer of Andean dust, the exposed hydraulic systems where the technicians had been working. And then, with that voice that men accustomed to being obeyed have, he asked, "Can someone explain to me why this $4.2 million machine has been turned into a giant paperweight for 2 weeks?" The three technicians from Bogota nervously stepped forward. The oldest of them, a mechanical engineer named Fernando with 15 years of experience, began to explain in a trembling voice everything they had tried. And believe me, it was no small feat. They had changed the 3 fuel filters in the system, thinking it might be contamination. They completely checked the electrical system on the diesel. New 12V battery, alternator working perfectly. All cables and connections checked with a multimeter. They disassembled and cleaned the injectors on the Deutz BF4M 2012 engine. Each of the 4 cylinders was checked with millimeter precision. They checked the fuel pressure in the line. 2 bars exactly within the range specified by the manufacturer. They checked every sensor, oil temperature, hydraulic pressure, coolant temperature. Everything was normal. They even called a specialized BOMAG technician in Germany via video call, who guided them step by step for 3 hours. Nothing. The machine simply turned the starter motor, coughed a little, but never completed the ignition cycle. It was as if something invisible was preventing the steel heart from waking up. Silverio listened to all this with an expression that mixed boredom and growing irritation. When Fernando finished, there was a heavy silence, and then Silverio said something that made the blood run cold in everyone present. "I see 3 incompetent engineers earning salaries of 8 million pesos a month each, and none of them can start a machine." "Perfect," he paused dramatically. "You're all fired. You have 2 hours to pack your things and get off my site." Panic took hold of the technicians' faces. Fernando tried to protest, to explain that it was an extraordinarily complex problem, but Silverio raised an impatient hand, silencing him. It was at that exact moment that Loleta, who had been watching everything from a few feet away, stepped forward. Her safety boots crunched on the loose gravel. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm but clear as a bell. "Mr. Silverio, if you'll allow me, I could check the machine." Time seemed to stand still. 80 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Silverio looked at her as if a stray dog had just spoken to him in French. "Excuse me." His tone dripped with pure venom. "You, a girl who probably doesn't even know how to change a tire, are going to solve what engineers with degrees from German universities couldn't." Don Duarte, who had remained silent until then, felt every muscle in his body tense. He knew his daughter. He knew that determination in her eyes. But he also knew the danger of defying men like Silverio. Loleta didn't flinch. And here, my friends, is where I was filled with admiration for this girl, because facing contempt with dignity requires a courage that many do not have. "Mrs. Maya," she said, using her last name with respect, but without submission, "I have been working with heavy machinery for 9 years. I am certified in the operation and maintenance of compactors, excavators, and backhoes, and I am studying industrial mechanical engineering with a specialization in hydraulic systems." Silverio's laughter was obscene in its cruelty. It was a laugh that had nothing to do with joy, only distilled contempt. "Engineering you," he looked around for accomplices in his mockery. "Let me guess. You study at some garage university where they sell you degrees by correspondence, right? National University of Columbia, sir." "Night campus, average of 4.8 out of 5.0, Loleta replied in a firm voice. That should have shut him up. But men like Silverio, when they feel their authority is challenged, become even more cruel. And what he did next, oh my God, what he did next was so calculatedly evil that it still hurts to remember. Silverio snapped his fingers at the foreman. "Rodrigo, gather all the workers here. I want everyone to see this right now." Rodrigo hesitated for a second, but Silverio's gaze brooked no argument. Within minutes, 80 workers gathered in an irregular semicircle around the boom lift. Operators of other machines, construction assistants, welders, surveyors. Some looked on with curiosity, others with concern. Everyone could sense that something terrible was about to happen. Silverio climbed onto a metal platform used to access the tanker trucks, rising half a meter above everyone else. From there, with the theatricality of a showman, he announced, "Gentlemen, this young woman," pointed at Loleta with an exaggerated gesture. "She says she can repair what 3 professional engineers couldn't. She says she can get this machine started." He paused for effect. "I think that's impossible, but I'm a fair man, so I'm going to make her an offer." Loleta's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Not out of fear, not out of pent-up rage at the injustice of it all, but she kept her face serene as a lake in the morning. "If you manage to star this Bomac B213 in 3 minutes," Silverio continued, his smile like a shark's, "I'll give you my entire company, the $380 million Amaya infrastructure. All yours. I'll sign the papers right here." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some workers exchanged incredulous glances. 3 minutes to diagnose and repair what had taken 2 weeks without a solution. But when you fail, and Silverio emphasized the when with venom, you will leave here immediately. And I will personally make sure that every contractor in Colombia knows that Loleta Ruiz is a fraud who pretends to be an engineer. You will never work in construction again. Your career will end today." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath in the Andean mountains. Don Duarte felt his legs almost give way. His daughter, his little Loleta, was being put up against the wall in the cruelest way possible. It wasn't just her job that was at risk, it was her entire future, her dreams, everything she had fought for over the years. Several workers looked at Loleta with pity, others with embarrassment. Fernando, one of the recently fired technicians, shook his head discreetly as if to tell her not to accept this madness. But then Loleta did something no one expected. She took 3 firm steps forward, standing in front of Silverio, with her back straight and her head held high. When she spoke, her voice did not waver in the slightest. "I accept your bet, Don Silverio, but with one additional condition." Silverio raised an eyebrow, amused by her audacity. One condition. You're setting conditions for me? This is getting interesting. Speak. If I manage to start this machine in 3 minutes, said Loletta, her voice now sharp as steel, you will work for a full month as a construction assistant here on this site, wearing a helmet, safety boots, and carrying a shovel, earning the minimum wage of 1,160,000 pesos per month. You will sleep in the same barracks as the workers. You will eat the same food and learn what it means to build something with your own hands. The murmur of the crowd turned into stifled exclamations. This girl had just challenged the most powerful tycoon in Colombian construction. She had just asked him to work as a common laborer. Silverio stared at her for 5 eternal seconds. In his mind, the proposal was absurd, almost insulting, but it was also impossible for her to gain 3 minutes to repair what specialized technicians had not been able to do in 2 weeks. It was mathematically impossible. And then, with a smile that was pure arrogance, Silverio extended his hand. Deal, young lady. When you fail, it will be a spectacle that everyone will remember. Loletta shook his hand. His hand was soft, without a single callus. Hers had the rough texture of honest work. Rodrigo shouted Silverio, set the timer, 3 minutes exactly. And all of you, he pointed to the crowd, take out your cell phones. I want this recorded. It will be a lesson we will share in every theater in the country about what happens when arrogance masquerades as confidence. Dozens of cell phones were raised. The digital age had even reached the Andean Mountains at an altitude of 20,800 meters. In seconds, this would be all over social media. Don Duarte made his way through the crowd until he was in the front row where his daughter could see him. When their eyes met, he said nothing. He just put his hand on his heart and nodded once, a gesture that said, I trust you, my daughter, whatever you do. I trust you. Loletta took a deep breath, took the technical manual from under her arm, and left it on the floor. She wouldn't need it. Everything she needed was in her mind, in her hands, in those 9 years of experience and 3 years of college that no one there valued. Rodrigo raised his digital stopwatch, the same one they used to measure truck loading time. Ready? He asked. And in his voice, there was genuine concern for the young woman. Ready? Lolita replied. 3 minutes, go. The digital stopwatch read 3-2 and began the countdown. Everyone expected Loletta to run to the machine, desperately open the hood, and start touching wires and hoses like they do in the movies. But no, this young woman did something that left everyone baffled. She didn't touch the machine. Instead, she walked slowly around the BBV-213 as if she were a doctor examining a patient before making a diagnosis. Her eyes scanned every inch of those 13 tons of German steel with such intense concentration that you could feel her mind working at 1,000 revolutions per minute. What is she doing? Someone in the crowd murmured. Time was ticking, but Loletta ignored everything. She crouched down next to the left side of the engine compartment, where the compacted dirt floor showed dark spots. She ran her fingers over a specific oil stain, rubbed it between her thumb and forefinger, and sniffed it. Her eyes narrowed. Then she walked to the rear, observing the angle at which the rear compactor cylinder was positioned. Something there was not right, something almost imperceptible that only someone with years of experience could notice. 240. On the stopwatch, Silverio watched with his arms crossed, his arrogant smile still intact. In his mind, this was exactly what he expected. A girl wasting time on meaningless rituals, while the seconds slipped away like water through her fingers. But then Loletta approached the previous operator of the bomb, a man named Gustavo, who had been driving compactors for 20 years. Without rushing, as if he had all the time in the world, she asked him 3 questions with surgical precision. Gustavo, when you tried to start it the last time, was the hydraulic pressure on the gauge normal, or was it fluctuating? Gustavo blinked, surprised by the specificity of the question. Fluctuating, miss. It went up and down between 180 and 220 bars. And the engine oil temperature when it failed was cold, barely 40 degrees, even though we had tried to start it several times. Last question. When you turned the key, what sound did it make exactly? A sharp click or a continuous hum? Gustavo closed his eyes, remembering a hum, but as if cut off, as if something interrupted the electrical flow every second. Loletta's eyes sparkled. There it was, all the pieces of the puzzle fitting together in her mind like the gears of a Swiss watch. 2:10 on the stopwatch. The crowd was starting to get nervous. Fernando, the fired technician, shook his head. It was impossible. No one could diagnose a problem like that in less than 2 minutes. No one. But then Loleta turned to everyone present, and when she spoke, her voice had the absolute authority of someone who knows exactly what they are talking about. The problem is not in the fuel system. It is not in the battery or the alternator. It is not in the injectors or the sensors. She paused, and in that silence you could hear the wind whistling through the mountains. The fault is in the hydraulic system relief valve combined with a blockage in the Deutz engine starter solenoid. The three technicians from Bogota were speechless. Fernando felt the blood drain from his feet. She had just identified exactly what they had failed to see in 14 full days. The hydraulic system has fluctuating pressure, Loleta continued, now walking toward the side compartment of the engine, which prevents the engine from completing the ignition cycle. The relief valve is partially blocked, creating back pressure, and the starter solenoid is out of sync by just 0.3 seconds, enough to interrupt the ignition sequence of the high-compression diesel engine. Silverio was no longer smiling. His face showed genuine confusion. How could this girl be describing such specific technical problems with such confidence? 145 on the stopwatch. Now Loleta took action, but not with desperation. With the precision of a cardiovascular surgeon operating on a human heart. She opened the left side compartment of the engine, revealing years of familiarity with every screw and every access point of that machine. Her calloused, strong hands moved with a delicacy that contrasted with the roughness of the industrial metal. She located the relief valve of the hydraulic system, a fist-sized piece that regulated the pressure flow. The technicians had checked it, yes, but only visually. Loleta knew something they didn't. In Bomac BB213 models, manufactured between 2015 and 2021, that specific valve had a design flaw documented in a German technical bulletin that she had studied during her industrial hydraulic systems class at university with a 6mm Allen key. She loosened 3 safety screws in a specific sequence. First the top one, then the bottom left one, finally the bottom right one, never in any other order because that could damage the internal seal. She partially removed the valve and using only her fingers manually adjusted an internal spring that the technicians didn't even know existed. At 11, on the stopwatch, Don Duarte watched with tears in his eyes. He recognized every move. He had taught her the basics, yes, but what he was seeing now was pure applied university knowledge. His daughter had surpassed the teacher long ago. Loleta readjusted the valve to its position, tightened the screws in reverse order, and then moved with controlled speed to the starter solenoid. This one was more complicated. The solenoid is basically an electromagnetic switch that allows current to flow from the battery to the starter motor. If it is out of sync, it creates that interrupted buzzing sound Gustavo had described. With a 10mm of precision wrench, Loleta loosened the solenoid just half a turn. No more than half a turn counterclockwise. Too much and the system would fail completely. Too little and the problem would persist. There was no margin for error here. 0:52 on the stopwatch. The crowd held its breath. Cell phones continued to record, capturing every second of what was happening. Silverio had approached without realizing it, his curiosity overcoming his arrogance. Loleta closed the side compartment, secured the safety locks, wiped her hands on her overalls, and walked toward the operator's cabin. She climbed the 3 metal steps with the confidence of someone who had climbed into that cab 1,000 times before. 0:38 on the stopwatch. She sat down in the operator's seat, adjusted the side mirrors out of pure habit, and then did something crucial that the technicians had never done. She first activated the auxiliary hydraulic system, allowing the pressure to stabilize for exactly 5 seconds before attempting to start the engine. This was knowledge she had gained directly from the German Baumag technical manual she had studied, a 340-page manual she had read cover to cover during sleepless nights. 0:25 on the stopwatch. The hydraulic pressure gauge stabilized at exactly 200 bars. Perfect. Loletta placed her hand on the ignition key for a second, just a second, closed her eyes, and thought of her father on all those frosty mornings when she was 12, and he taught her that machines have souls, that if you respect them, they will respond. 15. She turned the key on the stopwatch. The starter motor began to turn. The sound filled the air of the Andean mountains. 1, 2, 3 turns of the crankshaft. And then, with a roar that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth, the 129 horsepower Deutz BF4M 2012 engine awoke. The roar was beautiful, deep, powerful, steady. The 13 tons of German steel vibrated with renewed life. The compactor cylinders began to move. The hydraulic system responded perfectly. Every indicator on the dashboard showed normal values. 0.02 on the stopwatch. Loletta gently accelerated, bringing the engine speed to 1800 RPM. The Bomb 233 had not only started, it was running as smoothly as a machine fresh off the factory floor. The stopwatch read 0.00 just as Loletta turned off the engine and climbed out of the cab. Rodrigo looked at his digital stopwatch, and his voice trembled as he announced, 2 minutes and 58 seconds. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the 80 workers present could not process what they had just witnessed. And then, like a wave crashing against the rocks, the ovation erupted. Men who had been in construction for 30 years shouted like children, some crying openly. Gustavo, the previous operator, ran toward Loletta with open arms. Don Duarte fell to his knees on the floor, his shoulders shaking with sobs of pure pride. Cell phones continued to record. This would not just be a story from the construction site. It would go viral throughout Colombia in a matter of hours. And in the midst of all that celebration, Silverio Amaya remained completely motionless. His face had lost all color. His hands, those soft hands that had never carried anything heavier than a briefcase, were visibly shaking. For the first time in his life, the most powerful man in Colombian construction had absolutely nothing to say. The ovation continued to echo in the mountains as Loletta descended from the cab of the Bomag. Her boots touched the ground firmly, and the sound of the newly repaired engine roared like background music, a symphony of victory that none of those present would ever forget. Loletta walked towards Silverio with measured steps, unhurried, with a dignity that only people who have been tested by fire and come out stronger possess. The circle of workers opened up, creating a path between her and the magnate. Silence gradually fell over the crowd because everyone knew they were witnessing something important, something that would change everything. Silverio remained paralyzed, watching her approach as if she were an apparition his mind could not process. His Italian 12-piece suit suddenly looked like a ridiculous costume in the middle of that worksite, surrounded by men and women in grease-stained overalls and muddy boots. When Loletta stood in front of him, barely 2 meters away, she spoke in a calm voice, but one that everyone could hear. Don Silverio, the problem was relatively simple for someone who understands the relationship between hydraulic systems and high-compression diesel engines. The relief valve was creating variable back pressure, and the starter solenoid needed a half-turn calibration, nothing that isn't documented in the official BOMAC technical manual, page 247, section 8.4. The technical specificity of her explanation was like a slap in the face to the 3 engineers from Bogota who were still there, witnesses to their own incompetence. Fernando, the oldest of them, had his head down, unable to look anyone in the eye. But the real problem, Loletta continued, her voice now sharp as steel, wasn't with the machine. It was with the assumption that a woman couldn't understand something that professional men hadn't been able to figure out. Silverio tried to speak, opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was as if the words were stuck in his throat, drowned out by shame and disbelief. And then something happened that no one, absolutely no one, expected. Silverio Amaya, the man who controlled $380 million, who signed contracts with governments, who had never bowed to anyone in his life, fell to his knees in the mud. The sound of his knees hitting the muddy ground was like thunder in the silence. His Italian pants were immediately stained with Andean mud. His hands sank into the wet earth, searching for support. And then this 48-year-old man began to cry. These were not discreet tears, but deep sobs that came from some dark place in his soul that he had kept closed for decades. I don't know anything. His voice was barely a broken whisper. I know absolutely nothing. I inherited an empire, but I can't build a single meter of road. I can't repair a machine. I can't. He choked on his own words. My son was right. I am an empty man who buys everything but builds nothing. The raw vulnerability in his confession made several workers look away, uncomfortable to see such a powerful man breaking down like this. Loleta remained where she was, watching him. In her heart, there was no triumphalism or cruelty, only a deep sadness for the amount of talent that this man had wasted throughout his life. That was when Don Duarte approached. He had been crying too, but now he had dried his tears and walked with the quiet dignity of men who have worked honestly all their lives. When Don Duarte reached Loleta's side, several of the older workers began to murmur among themselves. Rodrigo, the foreman, stepped forward and spoke loudly. Don Silverio, perhaps you don't know this because you've never taken the time to get to know the people who build your roads. But Don Duarte Bayon is a living legend in road construction in Colombia. The murmurs turned into affirmations. Another worker, an older man named Mauricio, added, with 32 years of experience, Don has operated and repaired every machine that exists, from Caterpillar excavators to 60-meter tower cranes. He has built roads in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, Panama, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, 8 countries where his name is respected. Don Duarte put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a pride that didn't need to be shouted to be heard. This girl learned from me when she was just a child, yes, but she surpassed me long ago because I taught her to respect the machines. But she went further. She understood them on a level I will never reach. Loleta felt tears welling up, but she held them back. It wasn't time yet. She looked at Silverio, still kneeling in the mud, and decided it was time to reveal her entire secret. Don Silverio, I don't just work on this construction site. Every night, after my 10-hour shifts here, I get on a bus that takes an hour and a half to get to Bogota. I study at the National University of Colombia, industrial mechanical engineering, specializing in heavy machinery and hydraulic systems. I've been doing this for 3 years. I have 3 semesters left before I graduate. I maintain a GPA of 4.8 out of 5.0. I pay for each semester with my salary, peso by peso. The faces of surprise were widespread. Now, even workers who had known Loleta for months did not know this. She had kept her secret because she knew that some would look at her with envy. Others would think she thought she was better than them. My classmates, she continued, are children of wealthy families who have never worked a day in their lives. They complain about how difficult it is to study. I come to class with my hands still smelling of diesel and my eyes burning with fatigue, but I have never ever missed a class. I have never turned in an assignment late because I want to prove something you don't believe is possible, that a woman can not only operate machines, but design them, improve them, teach others how to repair them. Silverio looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. Why? Why do you do all that? Couldn't you get an easier job, with better pay, without destroying your body? Loleta's answer was simple, but it contained oceans of meaning, because it is here in the mud and dust and sweat that countries are really built. Contracts are signed in air-conditioned offices with panoramic views. But the roads, the bridges, the works that connect people, those are made with hands like mine. And I want that someday, when someone drives down this highway, they will know that women's hands built it with the same strength, the same knowledge, and the same dignity as any man. The silence that followed was sacred. It was the kind of silence that only exists when a profound truth has been spoken and everyone recognizes it in their hearts. Silverio wiped his tears with the back of his hand, smearing mud on his face in the process. And then he asked a question that revealed that something genuine had changed inside him. Why does a woman with your talent, your dedication, your intelligence work operating machines instead of managing projects? Why are you here and not in an office designing highways? Loleta smiled for the first time all afternoon. It was a sad but beautiful smile. Because no one has offered me the opportunity, Don Silverio. Because when I go to interviews, they see my calluses, my age, my gender, and decide that I'm not professional enough for those positions. Because the world still believes that women like me belong behind a desk filing papers. not at the forefront of 420-kilometer projects that will change the lives of millions of people. Something broke and reconfigured inside Silverio at that moment. I can't explain exactly what it was, but everyone there felt it. It was like watching a man be painfully reborn with the humiliation of mud on his knees and the truth burning his soul. And now we come to the end of this story, my dear friends. And I promise you that this ending will fill your hearts with hope, because it is one thing to promise to change and quite another to actually transform yourself. And Silverio Amaya, to the surprise of many and the satisfaction of all, kept his word. The next day at 5:30 in the morning, when the sun was just painting the Andean peaks orange, Silverio Amaya showed up at the construction site. But he didn't arrive in his black Mercedes-Benz. No, he arrived in the same rickety bus that the workers used, squeezed in among other men who smelled of cheap soap and coffee from a thermos. And his appearance, oh my God, his appearance meant that several people did not recognize him at first. He was wearing blue overalls, new and stiff, because he had never worn a pair before. Yellow safety boots that squeezed his feet, accustomed to Italian leather, a yellow safety helmet, leather gloves. And in his eyes, where there had once been arrogance, there was now something different. Humility mixed with determination. For 30 full days, Silverio worked as a construction assistant. And it wasn't symbolic work, was it? Rodrigo, the foreman, put him to do the hardest tasks because he knew that was what the man needed. He carried 50-calorie bags of cement under the sun that burns at that altitude. His hands were covered with blisters that burst and bled. He mixed concrete with a shovel for hours until his arms trembled with exhaustion. He cleaned clogged drains, sticking his hands into foul-smelling mud. He helped Don Duarte and other veteran operators perform basic maintenance on the excavators, getting industrial grease up to his ears. The first few nights, he cried from physical pain in the shared barracks, where he slept on a metal bunk bed with a thin mattress. His back, accustomed to $4,000 ergonomic chairs, screamed in agony, but every morning he got up again and something beautiful began to happen. The workers, who at first looked at him with suspicion, waiting for him to quit, began to respect him. Mauricio, the 58-year-old veteran, taught him how to lift heavy loads without damaging his spine. Gustavo showed him how to read the pressure gauges on the hydraulic hoses, and Loleta, yes, Loleta, spent 2 hours every Saturday teaching him the basics of auto mechanics. Silverio listened with the attention of a child in his first class. He asked questions that others would consider silly, but which revealed a genuine desire to learn. And when Loleta explained how an excavator's transmission system worked, he took notes in a grease-stained notebook. At the end of the month, when the 30th arrived, Silverio gathered all the workers on the site. His hands were no longer soft. They were calloused, scarred from minor cuts. His nails permanently darkened by grease that no soap could completely remove. His face was unevenly tanned by the Andean sun. He had lost 18 pounds, but his eyes shone with something they had never had before. With genuine purpose, his voice firm but charged with emotion, he made an announcement that would change lives. I'm not going to give my company to Loleta because it would be irresponsible to dismantle 40 years of business history built by my father. But I'm going to do something better. I'm going to create a new department within Amaya Infrastructure, the Amaya Technical Excellence Division. He paused, looking directly at Loleta. Loleta Ruiz, I want to appoint you as technical director of this new division. Your salary will be 85 million pesos a year. It will be the highest paid technical position in the entire company. You will have the authority to hire your own team, set quality and training standards, and report directly to me. The silence that followed was broken by Don Duarte's cry of joy as he hugged his daughter so tightly that he almost lifted her off the ground. 85 million a year was more than they had both earned together in their entire lives. But Silverio wasn't finished. And Don Duarte Bayan, you will be appointed General Operations Supervisor with a 340% increase in your salary. I need your 32 years of experience to help me understand what it really means to build with excellence. Tears ran freely down the old worker's weathered cheeks. 32 years of waiting for someone to recognize not only his work, but his knowledge. And there's more, Silverio continued, his voice now trembling with emotion. I am going to establish a full scholarship fund for 50 low-income women who want to study mechanical, civil, or industrial engineering. It will be called the Loletta Ruiz Program for Female Technical Excellence. It will cover tuition, books, transportation, and a monthly stipend so they don't have to work and study at the same time like Loletta did. The ovation was deafening. Tough men who never showed emotion cried openly because they all understood that this was not just money, it was justice. It was recognition. It was dignity restored. The months passed like water in the Andean rivers. The Andean Highway progressed rapidly under Loletta's new technical direction, who implemented quality control systems that reduced errors by 67%. Don Duarte trained a new generation of operators with the patience of a teacher and the wisdom of decades. And Silverio, completely transformed, began to visit every one of his company's construction sites. No longer from air-conditioned offices, but with boots in the mud, talking to welders, surveyors, operators, learning names, listening to stories, building not contracts, but human relationships. A year later, on a golden October afternoon, the Andes Highway was inaugurated with presidential honors, 420 kilometers of perfect asphalt connecting Bogota with Medellin, reducing travel time from 11 hours to 6, an engineering masterpiece valued at $90 million. Loletta, now an engineer with honors from the National University, led a team of 120 specialized technicians, 30 of whom were women graduates of the Loletta Ruiz program, brilliant young women who proved every day that talent has no gender. Don Duarte, with his new position and salary, had bought a small but decent house on the outskirts of Bogota. For the first time in her life, his wife did not have to worry about money for medicine. For the first time, they could eat meat more than once a week. But what filled him with the most pride was seeing his daughter, his little Loletta, signing design plans with expert authority. And Silverio, oh Silverio, experienced the most beautiful miracle of all. 3 months after his transformation, he received a call from Paris. It was Matias, his son. He had seen viral videos of his father working on the construction site, covered in mud, carrying materials. And for the first time in 8 months, he spoke to him. "Dad, I saw what you did. I saw your transformation. I want to meet the man you have become." Matias returned to Colombia. When he saw his father with his calloused hands, he heard him speak with genuine respect for the workers. He saw the humility that had replaced arrogance. He cried as he hadn't cried in years and hugged his father as he had when he was a child. The inauguration ceremony was glorious, but the most significant moment did not take place on the presidential podium. It took place at the entrance to the construction site where they had restored and displayed the BBB 213 Bomac, which had been the catalyst for everything. They unveiled a bronze plaque mounted on the side of the machine. The words written by Silverio himself with Loletta's help read, "This machine represents that true power is not in inheriting empires, but in building legacies with knowledge, humility, and hands willing to get dirty for a better future." Here, a woman taught us that the dignity of work and respect for talent know no gender or class boundaries. May this Bomac BBD 213 forever remind us that greatness is not measured in millions of pesos, but in the willingness to learn, to change, and to recognize that every person who builds this country deserves our absolute respect. As the sun set over the Andean mountains, painting the sky purple and gold, Loletta and her father stood in front of that plaque. Don Duarte put his arm around his daughter's shoulders and whispered, "Your mom would be so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud." And Loletta, that 21-year-old girl who had become a woman who moved mountains of steel and prejudice, smiled with tears in her eyes. "We did it together, Dad. Everything I am is because you taught me that honest work should never, ever make us ashamed." This story, my dear friends, teaches us something we must never forget, that every person deserves to be judged by their talent and character, not by their gender or bank account. That true greatness lies in recognizing our mistakes and having the courage to change, and that the calloused hands that build our world deserve the same respect as the hands that sign contracts. Because at the end of the day, buildings collapse, money is spent, but the legacy of dignity and respect we leave behind lasts forever. Yeah.